Today I'll be going over Alanna Nash's book, Baby Let's Play House, Elvis Presley and the Woman Who Loved Him. We'll be going over chapter 15, which is titled Private Presley. On January 1st, 1958, Hank Snow's son, Jimmy Roger Snow, arrived at Graceland for an extended stay. Elvis had run into him backstage at the Grand Ole Opry and invited him to a spree of fun activities, such as roller rink skating and motorcycle riding, before Elvis had to leave to film King Creole and then off to the service. One night, Elvis was going over his script for the movie when he told Jimmy, "Hey man, why don't you just go out to California with me? I'll get you a bit part in the picture." Jimmy remembers, "I told him how much it meant for me to be there, but I said, I'm getting married in March and I'm going to the ministry." Elvis thought that was great. As a matter of fact, he was probably the only one who commended me for it. Everybody else thought I was crazy. Jimmy had made the decision 2 months prior after realizing he'd been living a dark life doing pills and boozing. He had turned to Jesus Christ. He said, "I was just a miserable, unhappy man, but the call of God was on my life. I had sensed it for years, but I didn't know what it was. I quit drinking and pills cold turkey. I was changing my life." Nash writes, "When Jimmy left Graceland in early 1958, his heart was heavy for two reasons. He feared for Elvis's soul, for the way he was conducting his personal life, and he worried about Gladys. My memory of his mother is coming downstairs and seeing her sitting in the kitchen drinking beer, always in the same chair. I don't know if she was a lush, but I would see it all the time." Alan Fortis was worried about Gladys too, because she hardly left the house, and ever since they hired Alberta, who Elvis called VO5, Gladys never cooked anymore. When Elvis first started recording music in 1954, he purchased an electric mixer for Gladys. Then a few days later, he went back to the store and purchased a second one for her. When the store owner asked why, Elvis told him it was for each end of the kitchen so that Gladys wouldn't have to walk so much. Jimmy and Alan noticed that Gladys rarely got out of the chair now. Alan said, "I just remember passing through the kitchen on my way out to the pool or into the den, and she'd always be there. 'Hello, Miss Presley, how you doing?' 'Fine, Alan.' To Alan, she was a nice, down-to-earth woman with no airs. He said she dipped her snuff, she watched TV in her room, and she worried about her boy." Gladys would spend her day sitting by the kitchen window gazing outside, or she'd sit out front away from the fans. That summer, Vernon drove Gladys down to Tupelo to visit Annie Presley. Annie said, "We was sitting there talking, and she said, 'Annie, I'd give the world if I lived next door where I could just get out and feed my chickens and do things, but Elvis won't let me do nothing. You know me, I want to do.'" Gladys would self-medicate by drinking bottles and bottles of beer, which she hid in the fridge behind the milk and Pepsis. She would drink the bottles out of a brown paper sack all day and would also use them to wash down the diet pills, Dexedrine or other amphetamines her doctor gave her. Billy Smith said she'd usually drink in her room so as to not drink in front of others. Nash writes, quote, "Elvis had known about her medication for a long time because, as Lamar remembers, he pilfered her speed to stay awake on the long drives on tour, even though it made him more hyper than usual. But he had been mystified by her wrenching mood swings. She would be bubbly one minute and at the ends of despair the next. She seemed to be weepy all the time and pale and withdrawn. She almost never came out of her robe anymore, and she walked so slowly. Somebody put it to early menopause because she'd be hot one minute and cold the next. But the dark circles under her eyes, the color of old blood, were getting so deep they threatened to one day swallow her up. She was almost 46 years old now, but everything about her seemed so much older." Gladys looked so bloated, and Elvis had asked her about it. She didn't want him to know how sick she was and didn't want him to worry, so she told him she didn't know and she wasn't sure of what the test results were. They had had such a strong bond, so much so that when Elvis's car caught fire that night in Arkansas, she bolted upright in her sleep and screamed, "Elvis!" But now that Elvis was preoccupied with preparing for the army, he seemed to be out of tune with her, and that was another source of grief. Gladys had lost Jesse, and now she felt she was losing Elvis. He'd be gone soon for basic training, and then he'd be sent off to Germany. Elvis said he'd be taking his family with him, but Gladys didn't believe it could happen. She told Lamar, "I can't see myself away from Sonny Boy that long, but I just can't go with him." The night before Elvis's induction, he and Anita and the entourage watched Sing Boy Sing at the drive-in, and then they went to the roller rink to play Crack the Whip. After the roller rink, Elvis handed out, quote, happy pills he had gotten at the dentist to help with the post-Crack the Whip pain. Then they went back to the house. It was Alan's night to stay in Elvis's room and watch for sleepwalking, but Elvis was too wired about leaving for the army, so they stayed up all night talking. Elvis reported for duty at 6:30 a.m. on March 24th, 1958, in the M&M building in Memphis. He would be assigned serial number 53310-761. Elvis's parents, Anita, Lamar, Alan, and Judy Spreckles, were there to see him off. Nash writes, quote, his double first cousin, the teenaged Patsy Presley, showed up along with a smattering of fans and quasi-romantic interests, including an attractive blonde named Bonnie Mosby Underwood, the wife of songwriter and future Sun Records engineer Charles Underwood, and the girl some people thought secretly owned Elvis's heart. He carried a small leather bag containing exactly what the induction notice said to bring: a razor, a toothbrush, a comb, and enough money to last for 2 weeks. Among the officers there that day was Walter Alden, whose 1-year-old daughter Ginger would grow up to have her own unique place in Elvis history. Elvis would then go to Kennedy Veterans Hospital, where he would undergo a physical. He would weigh in at 185 pounds and continue further processing. Later in the afternoon, he would be sworn in by Major Albert Turner, who would say to the group of recruits, congratulations, you are all privates. That's the way you'll be addressed from now on. Private Presley was put in charge of the unit. Parker was in the room, cheerful and handing out balloons emblazoned with King Creole on them. Elvis hugged and kissed Gladys, whose eyes were puffy with tears. She just clung to him. Then he kissed Anita and told her, little, I love you and I will return and don't forget me. By now, Anita, Gladys, and Vernon were all crying. It was time for Elvis to board the bus to Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. Nash writes, he looked at Lamar and the Cadillac limousine that had brought him there that day, and suddenly it was a symbol of everything he had worked so hard to get. Now it was all about to be gone. It was like a dream. Elvis said to the caddy, goodbye, you long black son of a bitch. And everyone laughed. Then he boarded the bus as 500 screaming girls saw him off. At Fort Chaffee, Elvis would have his famous pompadour sheared off, and he said, here today, gone tomorrow. Elvis learned he would be stationed at Fort Hood, located near Killeen, Texas. He'd be assigned to the 2nd Armored Division, General Patton's Hell on Wheels outfit. 4 days later, on March 28th, the Army transport bus was headed to Killeen when it made a stop in Hillsboro, Texas for lunch at a diner. A caravan of fans was also heading to Texas, and when a young girl recognized Elvis, chaos erupted. When Elvis left the diner, girls fought over his chair. The bus arrived at Fort Hood about 4:30 p.m. to a throng of reporters. Private Presley was the second person to get off the bus, and he saluted for the cameras and held a small press conference before going off to eat his first Army meal of fish and French fries. Wait a minute, so I thought he didn't like seafood, so I wonder if he actually ate that meal or if he got maybe like another special lunch. There were a bunch of teenage girls outside the mess hall. Let us see him and we'll go away. But the military police shooed them away. Elvis would receive 15,000 fan letters a week there, but they would all be redirected to Parker's office in Tennessee. Elvis was determined to fit in with his fellow recruits. Rex Mansfield, who was on board the same bus as Elvis, remembered how the other guys teased him. They'd say, where's your hound dog? And aren't y'all lonesome for your teddy bear? Each recruit was given $20 for basic necessities, and a sergeant told Elvis, Presley, give me that $20. You don't need it. Elvis told him, nah, Sergeant, I'm broke. The teasing ended when it was clear Elvis refused special treatment and endured the same hard duties as everyone else, like marching with a 75-pound sack in the Texas heat. Nash writes, and Elvis was even more surprised to find out that he liked the Army, the organization, the respect of men, the routine, and predictably the twinless twins, the uniform, the infinite replication. It served a psychological need. Fort Hood was an open base, so off-duty soldiers could bring guests. And sometimes these guests would try and find Elvis. One night, Sergeant Dorton Matthews woke up around midnight to some commotion. There were 15 or 20 women in the barracks looking for Elvis, and guards were soon installed after that. Lamar had tried to enlist in the army with Elvis, but given his size, he failed the physical and didn't qualify. So he drove to Killeen in Elvis's Mark II and checked into a motel. So Elvis wasn't truly alone, and he was happy to have Lamar. But Elvis really missed Gladys, and he fell into depression. Master Sergeant William Norwood saw how unhappy Elvis was and took him to his house so that Elvis could make a phone call. After that, Elvis was a frequent visitor at the Norwood's home, and Norwood became a second father to him. Norwood told Elvis, "When you come in my house, you can let it all out, but when you walk out of my front door, you are now Elvis Presley. You're an actor, you're a soldier, so by God, I want you to act. Don't let anybody know how you feel on the inside." Elvis also had a friend named Eddie Fadal who lived in Waco, Texas, 45 minutes away, with his wife Linnell and their 2 kids, daughter Janice and son Dana. Eddie had been a DJ in Dallas in 1956, but now owned a theater, and he showed a picture of him and Elvis to the gate guards so they would let him in, and they did. Eddie found Elvis shining his boots, and he invited Elvis to join his family on weekends if he'd like. Elvis accepted, but told him he had to stay on base for the first 2 weeks. When Elvis did go to Eddie's house, the first thing he did was call Gladys. Eddie remembered, when he got her on the line, all he said was, "Mama," and apparently she said, "Elvis." And from then on, for a whole hour, they were crying and moaning on the telephone. Hardly a word was spoken. Soon, Anita started coming down for weekends. She had been to Killeen before, staying at the Norwoods, and Elvis would sneak out of the barracks to be with her. Anita was surprised at what a normal guy Elvis turned into. No lifts in his shoes or dyed hair. She said, "He would come over and then we would go in the backyard and look up at the sky. We'd talk about all the things we were planning on doing, like getting married, all the things in the future." Nash writes, and he meant it. Being in the army had changed his thinking. One time when they drove to Dallas with Eddie, Anita went to the restroom and Elvis called Eddie over to the car. He put his foot on the bumper and said, "Eddie, when old E here gets ready to get married, it's going to be to that girl, Anita Wood, and no one else. She's the one." Elvis and Anita would visit the Fadal home, and Linnell would cook a pound of bacon for him, burnt to a crisp, of course. That actually hurts my teeth just thinking about biting into bacon burnt to a crisp. Eddie had even built an additional room to the house specifically for Elvis, and in it he placed a piano and the latest hi-fi equipment. There was nothing Eddie wouldn't get for Elvis, including prescription pills. Eddie's daughter Janice remembers, "My father knew all the doctors in town. It was easy to get a prescription filled. He'd say, 'Elvis needs to sleep.'" In May, Anita turned 20 years old, and the Fadals celebrated by getting her a cake. And Elvis slow danced with her and sang, "Happy, happy birthday, baby." Eddie turned on the tape recorder and recorded Elvis playing the piano, as well as Elvis and Anita singing Hank Williams' "I Can't Help It If I'm Still in Love with You." Anita was going to have her first professional recording debut in June, and she was nervous about it. On the tapes, Elvis can be heard saying, "I wish they'd let me pick it. They got to give her something like Connie Francis' songs, something with some guts to it." Anita remembers, "It was the greatest time that I ever spent with him. He was a soldier boy, and I was his girlfriend from back home, and we were in love, and we were together with friends. We just had a wonderful time." On May 31st, Elvis got a 2-week leave from the Army. He spent a week in Memphis and then went to Nashville for an all-night recording session at RCA. It was his first session without Scotty and Bill, who had quit over a, quote, money dispute. DJ and the Jordanaires were there, though, and by the end of the session, he had several soon-to-be hits that would be played when he was away. "I Need Your Love Tonight" and a big Hunk of Love. Back on base, Elvis applied to live off base with his dependents. Soldiers who completed basic training could apply, and usually the dependents were spouses and children, but in Elvis's case, it was his parents and Minnie Mae. On June 20th, Elvis had made arrangements with Style Master Mobile Homes to use a 3-bedroom trailer near Fort Hood in exchange for promotional photos. That weekend, he and his parents and Minnie Mae and Lamar moved into the trailer. Anita was doing a summer TV series in New York, and when she flew in on weekends, she would stay there too. Gladys was initially thrilled to be in the trailer taking care of her son again, But all the people in the tight quarters started getting to her. Then the AC broke and the toilet stopped up, and there was the constant fans knocking on the door morning, noon, and nights. On July 1st, Vernon moved the family to a spacious 3-bedroom home on Oak Hill Drive, paying rent for 2 months that totaled $1,400. And then everyone was happy again. The family spent the July 4th holiday at the Vidals, and soon Junior and Jean came down too. Elvis had a happy home life and was enjoying Army life too. Rex Mansfield said, he loved the Army. It was a way to express himself and find out who he really was. Nash writes, but the last happy chapter of his life was coming to an end. Suddenly, Gladys's health began to spiral. She lost her appetite, and she seemed so listless in the Texas heat, found it hard to breathe. Lamar saw what was happening. One day I looked at her, and she had a yellow tinge to her eyes. I went to Elvis and I said, you need to call a doctor. Something's wrong, and I mean it. But he didn't want to hear about it. It was her liver. She was suffering from acute hepatitis. Within days, her skin turned sallow, prompting Lamar to again plead with Elvis. If you don't let her go to the hospital, buddy, she's going to die right here on you. But Elvis was in denial, thinking that she would get better soon. It wasn't until Red came down and he and Lamar both hounded Elvis that a local doctor was finally called to the house. The doctor said Gladys should go home right away and see her own physician, Dr. Charles Clark. On Friday, August 8th, Elvis drove his parents to Temple, Texas, where they would take the train back home. Lamar said, she didn't want to go. She knew she was dying. That's it for chapter 15. Stay tuned for chapter 16, which is titled, Wake Up, Mama, Wake Up. See you then.